Thanks, everybody. This is really cool. I was telling Brander when I came in, first thing I thought was, who would have thought that you could get a project and this would happen a few years later. It's really it's amazing. It feels good to speak up here, and that wouldn't be true without all of you using oclif and being a part of the community. So I really want to thank you. We launched oclif. The public release was in February 2018. And by my estimate, which is rough because we don't track oclif that well, but I think there's over 1 million people downloading oclif-based CLIs every week, which is crazy. Just of the generator alone, NPM saying that we get over 3,000 people downloading the generator every week. And we've got over 3,000 stars on GitHub, which actually makes the project the most successful open source project at Salesforce. You can sort of see these bumps are where we wrote blog posts. My favorite part of this chart is, a couple months ago, it seems like we're starting to get this organic growth where people are just discovering oclif for who knows how and using it to build tools for their companies. It seems like probably every couple of weeks I see a CLI launched on Hacker News and I go and crack open the code and find that it's written in oclif. People really like using TypeScript. I think that's one of the more surprising things about oclif. Like when I first wrote everything, I thought JavaScript would be about as popular as TypeScript, but I think it's probably 90% TypeScript. People really like using TypeScript to write CLIs. They really like the generator. It's really easy to get started building oclif projects. Plugin support, it's unparalleled. I don't think there's a CLI framework of any language that has as advanced plugin support as we do. The auto updating, we've made a lot of mistakes with the Heroku CLI, but thankfully you guys don't have to live through those. We've learned from them and able to deliver you guys a great auto update experience in oclif plugin. Autocomplete, it's a great way to just throw in autocomplete, which makes your CLI feel really well built without a lot of extra work, and you can trust it's scalable. There's already a lot of big CLIs written in TypeScript, and you can do whatever you like. So, as some of you know, I'm moving on from Heroku CLI. I've worked on it for 5 years, so I'm stepping down from the oclif core team, and so I thought, at this talk, it'd be good if I planted a bunch of seeds of different ideas that I had for the CLI that I didn't get around to doing. Sort of seeds of conversation to think about today, to talk about with the other attendees of the conference, and also for the oclif core team to think about. Some of these are hard problems that I just wasn't able to figure out the solution to. Others are just, work that I just flat out didn't get around to doing. So without further ado, I'm just going to get into it. And these are in no particular order. First, I have space-separated CLIs. Using a colon to separate commands, I'm not sure. I still don't know if I think it's better or worse than having spaces. Just two different ways of doing things. But when I came onto the Heroku CLI, it was already using colons, so I was pretty much limited to doing it that way. I think we should offer the option to have space-separated commands, and that's a common request from people when they first come to oclif. There is a plugin that does do this that Felipe wrote. It's experimental. I think there might need to be some changes made to core to support this, but it's something that I think should happen. And the core team members, they agree with me. So it's something we could use some help with. One note about this that's somewhat subtle is you can't have topic commands that accept arguments with space separated, right? If the CLI parser gets these two things, it can't tell the difference between the two. So the answer to this is if you have space separated, you can't have topic commands. That might seem like a subtle technicality, but it's just part of how it would have to work. Global flags, we do support, but I've never really been happy with this. Global flags is actually something we don't use in the Heroku CLI, but it's something that I think almost everybody that builds a large CLI wants to have. And the way that we do it is with the, I don't even know what that operator is called, the ellipsis on the command flags. it's sort of like the object concat spread. Oh, yeah, spread. And I think it's kind of ugly. I think if you're new to JavaScript, you don't know what that means. I think we could, I came up with a couple different solutions to solve this. Like one was having underscore flags be the flags on the command. Part of, and I'm going to get to this later, like this is hard because of TypeScript. The TypeScript really wants to have like a well-defined set of keys and values, right? So like extra flag has to point to a thing for like the typing to work correctly. And that's what makes this hard. But I think if I really would have stuck to it, I could have figured out a cleaner way to do this. I'd like to see one. This is a simpler one. Did you mean for flags? If you're looking to contribute to oclif, like it's not trivial, but this would be a really good thing to pick up because it's just, in my mind, it's a missing part of the product. We should just have this. I was playing around with a tool called Cobra, which is sort of our equivalent in the Go community. It's a pretty good CLI framework. One of the things in particular that I really like that we don't have is the ability to bind flags with configuration. So that configuration could take the form of a JSON file or environment variable or flag, whatever it is. You just bind it to the config with that library, and it works out everything. This we could do. The flag stuff in oclif would support this pretty well. It actually wouldn't even need to go into core. It'd just be a plugin. I think it's a pretty ergonomic way to do things. And I think, if we do this enough, we can start to set more standards around like how configuration should work with the CLI. Another idea I had was zero config oclif. Actually, I can't take credit for this. Somebody on GitHub suggested this, and I thought it was a great idea. But if you imagine you just write out a file and use, instead of the generator just being a generator, it'd be like more like Rails CLI, if you've ever used that, where you could just run it directly, and then you could pack it and everything. It'd be a little bit different of a direction. There's definitely some advantages the way we do it now, where it's like a fully fledged node project that you can just use bin run and like more standard tools to work with. This would be a simpler approach, or simpler in terms of like what files are there, but less following node conventions. Be interesting to look at how that might work though. Another thing I hate about oclif is this.parse. I really didn't want to have it. I wanted it, and actually earlier versions of it, you could just do like this.flags, and that would be like the parse flags. The reason it's like this is because TypeScript doesn't support like static generics, if that is a thing. I could have got around this by making everything functions and not using classes at all. And I really had to make a decision at one point, like, do I want classes or do I want to have this.parse? And I chose to have this.parse. I know it's like one line of code, but I feel like it shouldn't be necessary because obviously you're going to want to parse the flags on a command. Maybe if TypeScript got a bit better, or another solution is like you could have a generic of the class, and this is how a React works, where you could specify what the flags are. I think this is worse because you have to like define it twice. I really tried to work hard to make sure that wherever possible, the typing would be automatic, so that you could just write out whatever the code you wanted to write, and you didn't have to have a lot of type definitions. I think that's one of the reasons why people like to write TypeScript with oclif, is it's you don't really feel like you're writing types. You just write the code, and it checks to make sure your types are correct. Native dependencies are a huge pain when trying to ship a CLI. I think while I was at Heroku, I think we had 4 incidents, and 3 of them were related to the native dependencies that we tried to ship, which we didn't even use for that much stuff. So it's always been a big thorn in my side. It's really challenging to get right because you're just shipping binary code out to machines, and you run into problems like Arch Linux. Things never work the way you expect them to because the shared objects are in different places. But it is a common ask. People want to use native dependencies. There's some things that can only be done in native code. And the only way that we support it now is if you npm install something and do the builds on the client side. It would be a difficult project, but there would be a way to sort of cluster out to like a Windows machine and other things to build, at least for the 90 percentile, like builds that would work. npm auto updating is something else that gets asked about. You should be able to do this. You don't because of historical reasons with the Heroku CLI that I think is now a mistake. I think they should work. There's no reason why it shouldn't. Just because something is installed with npm doesn't mean it shouldn't be able to auto update. Part of the problem with this is the node version. So if you auto update to a version that requires a newer node version than the user has, that could be a problem. It's one of the reasons why we use the tarball, because that comes with the node binary inside of it, so that if somebody uses the CLI 4 or 5 years later and they never use their node, it'll still continue to work because the node will be baked into the thing. Still, I think this should there's ways to solve that problem that would be able to support this. Performance is unfortunately one of the problems and realities of doing Node.js development on the CLI. The startup time is not great. All told, I think that doing CLIs in TypeScript is incredible, but this is one of the areas where the startup time can be not so good. I think if we had better tools to build flame charts or at least show some like tracing information, how long is it taking in each hook, how long is it spending requiring files, maybe flag parsing if that happens to be taking a lot of time. I don't know, but it'd be good if we had more metrics because. As you start to build larger CLIs, especially hooks, like hooks are really dangerous for performance because it's literally running every time you run anything. So that's just overhead that you have to pay. I think there's a lot of improvements we can make to the generator. That was one of the last things that I wrote, and there's a lot of nasty code duplication like I have right here. It could be broken up, modularized, and also, I think I've found with larger CLIs, almost everybody eventually wants to create a generator of their own. Like Salesforce has their own so that people can build SFTX plugins. And that's a common enough thing that I think that we could provide a platform for them to build on top of and not doing what they had to do, which is literally clone fork the code base to get everything to work. Some other ideas I had is ESLint, because TSLint is going away. Palantir is not going to be developing anymore, and it's all just going to be ESLint for TypeScript and JavaScript. PNPM, sometimes people ask for. Again, config, and then supporting Windows builds too. Like I use a lot of Bash for the build scripts to build the tarballs. Be nice if that was would work in Windows and didn't require Bash. Yeah, the help. Help is one of the great things about oclif. It's one of the reasons why you'd want to use a framework, because it just generates the help right there for you. Unfortunately, it's not as extensible as it should be. It works well for Heroku, obviously, but when you want to customize it, it doesn't work as well as it should. I know the core team right now is working on templatizing this, which should go a long ways in helping that. But I think providing a bit more direction to how you could do that would be good as well. I also think building Docusaurus sites, that's how the oclif docs, it's this Facebook project called Docusaurus. It's a really good site generator, would be really good to have for people in their plugins. And then I throw ManPage on every time just because I'm curious if anybody ever wants it. And secretly, nobody ever seems to care. So, okay, right. That's why I throw it on here, because that's what I want to hear. It wouldn't be hard to do. I've looked into it. But again, I just haven't had that many people ask for it. So it's never been a priority of mine, I guess. But again, it'd be easy. And actually, when I released oclif, I looked at man pages, and that's how the version and all caps and the usage and commands, that all comes from man. I tried to make it as identical to man as I could. Now, earlier versions were not quite like that. Testing. So doing CLI testing in Node is not amazing. And I tried to build, as you guys probably know, fancy tests to make that easier. And I think in some ways it was a success. In other ways, I think could be better. Like one common thing is if you've ever tried to mock standard error, it doesn't work the way you expect it to. There are technical reasons why that is, but it should just be easier to use. I also wonder if maybe the function syntax of like doing the jQuery style chaining was, I wonder if that was the right call or not. I don't know, maybe. But it's an area that if I had another 6 months or a year to think about, I would probably be experimenting with alternatives. It'd be great if we provided some kind of analytics and error handling. You can use rollbar to gather errors from your oclif CLI, but it's noisy and not very useful. I think if we provided some direction and some areas to hook into, I think we could improve that. And I think also if we provided a standard analytics service, something like a Heroku app that you could just clone and throw up on a dyno somewhere, that would be really useful. People often want to see, telemetry and usage to get an idea of how people are using oclif. And the, usage statistics are so common across different CLIs. I think if one of us built it, we could all share that work. Dynamic commands. I'm not going to get into this so much. I know it's something that Twilio uses. Basically, the idea here is like, imagine you had an API schema and you wanted to build out a CLI out of that schema, like live. That it sort of works against a lot of the performance parts of oclif to make it fast. I leverage the fact that it's static in a lot of ways. This works against that. I'd like to see something better here. And my mad scientist sort of idea is oclifd. To really get around the startup problem, I've actually built up a prototype that has sort of a client server going where the CLI runs for a good 15 minutes after you run a command, and it's basically just there ready to dispatch more commands. That could make building CLIs in oclif just as fast as doing it in Go or something, but with the advantage of being able to write in a scripting language. I'd love to see that, but yeah, not something I got around to. Anyways, that's my thoughts. That's basically a brain dump of everything I've wanted to do. Thank you guys for using oclif, being a part of the community, and happy to take some questions. He asked if we're using Yeoman for doing the code generation. We are in the oclif generator. I think you guys are as well at SFDX. It sounds like PayPal is using Scaffold. Is that Schematics, which is an Angular project. I would look into that because I wouldn't say I've been super happy with Yeoman. Yeoman does one thing well, which is like it shows nice merges between like, if you had an existing project and you wanted to layer generate code on top of it, it shows you these nice like Git style diffs that I really like. I don't know if Schematics does that, but that's the one thing it does well. Everything else I think is it's okay. Yeah.
So you mentioned that obviously the package comes with a Node version. So at Intuit, we're doing oclif for front-end developers, and they have their own system Node version. Have you guys thought about a way to reconcile that between the users? So if we say, we're bringing 10.16 for some reason, but the user's on 8, right? If there's any conflict in that packaging, especially when you need to do like local compiles for OS-specific dependencies. So like Node SAS is something where we hit this, where like Node SAS needs a specific Node version to be built on, and then there's a collision somewhere else because the Node versions are different.
Yeah. So again, native dependencies are terrible, and best to be avoided all possible. The problem is that when you compile the Node version, you're using the system node, and then oclif runs, and it uses its own node, and they're not the same, so the module version doesn't match. I think that Node is fixing this with more portable Node versions, that specific problem. Yeah, I don't have more direction on that, except that I understand native dependencies are difficult.
I have two questions. I'm Shane.
Hey, Shane.
And so I have a plugin that's really a plugin to a plugin. So I'm writing mostly SFDX plugins. So how would you, I guess one of the questions is, how would I solve the reporting and analytics problem where I'm multiple N levels of plugins down the stack? Like, who's getting that data and who's got permission to kind of look at what users are doing?
Oh, interesting. So is this like, you want like telemetry of like how people install these plugins? Is that?
Installing maybe usage count and maybe error reporting. If it won't compile on Windows, it'd be nice if I knew that before people start filing GitHub tickets,
Well, I think that as it stands today, this is not something I've thought about, but we don't track like how the order that things were installed. We could. That would not be hard to add. We could fix that. I'll talk to you more about it. But
cool. And then question number 2 is, it would be really cool to have a generator so that I could say, here's this oclif command. Here's its required flags and optional flags. Generate a VS Code extension or action so that people maybe instead of dropping into the CLI all the time could use some of those shortcuts. I feel like every one of those would be a one-off, but it would be really useful for people who are in an IDE extension already. So maybe some of the more popular things, some sort of pathway to turn an oclif command into those little interactive shortcut things in the IDEs.
I think I haven't not heard that idea. That's a really good idea. Shouldn't be hard to do either. I think it works similar to the autocomplete stuff where basically, I don't know if you guys ever poked into the internals of oclif, but there's like the manifest file. You could probably use that to build out your VS Code thing. It'd be a pretty simple, like read a JSON file, output whatever VS Code needs, probably JavaScript files. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Hi. I thought that spaced command thing was pretty interesting, and you seem like you have it in for arguments anyway. Would you ever consider like deprecating arguments altogether?
Deprecating colons, you mean?
Arguments. So flags versus arguments, right? You always say flags is better than args, and then you come with and then you talk about the space separated commands instead of colon separated, and then you say that's incompatible with arguments. So I'm just like let's just get rid of arguments.
That's interesting. I could see how you could infer that I'm an argument hater. I don't think those are unrelated problems. The fact that you can't have topic commands and arguments at the same time, I think, is just a technicality that might surprise people that want to do that. I think args are good. I'm trying to think of a good example of where they come in handy. I mean, sometimes you need them, like Heroku Run, for example. Like everything's just an arbitrary argument. You don't know what it does. It just gets passed to the dyno. So, no, they would never be deprecated, but I do recommend flags, obviously, for self-documenting reasons. They're in the style guide. Thomas?
I was just going to say, I think one really good example of using args versus flags is a lot of times they're trying to wrap an API, and if the API takes 50 things, right, you start to blow out the flag list. And so I think it's not a bad thing to have a lot of flags, but at some point it's too many. And at some point, not all of them should have shorthand characters, right? And so you should always think about, I think of flags a lot more in terms of changing behavior of the command versus data of the command. And yeah, you can do both, but if let's say I'm trying to create a new user and I need to pass in a first name, last name, all of these things, right? To have a flag for every single one of those, even though yes, it is self-documenting, it gets really, really cumbersome. So just something to think about.
Yeah, that's a good point. Any more questions? No? All right. Well, I suppose we'll be doing the QA later, so if you guys have any more questions, we'll be around for that. On to the next speaker.